It's another episode of That Radically Sane Human. I said sane, Howard the Humongous!
So I have to confess something.
Yes, well, I have no energy tonight either, so...
I have to confess.
Yeah.
The State of the Union address was tonight. I didn't watch it.
I read the whole damn thing.
I couldn't watch it. I can't stand it. I've watched every year since I was cognizant of reality on any level, and I finally just said this year I'm not going to fucking do it, because it's always the same damn speech where the president comes up and he explains why everything isn't really as bad as everyone thinks, and then his party pretends to agree with him, and then the other party sits there scowling and looking sour.
Oh, God.
And
what a vision.
It's every fucking year. I just can't do it anymore. I feel like I got deja vu.
Oh, God. Well, it was an extremely good speech. It was extremely good within limits. We are living in a world of non-reality at the moment. We are living in a world of... Now, remember, I'm a lifelong Democrat, so I have to admit to a bias here. But we are living in a world of the big lie. The Republican Party has learned that if you train all your politicians, we've talked about this before, if you train all of your politicians to recite the same slogan over and over and over again, then people will come to believe it. So the Republicans have repeated the simple slogan of job killing this, job killing that, every time Obama's name comes up. So even if a program is going to produce 1 million jobs, the Republicans call it a job-killing bill. And even if it does produce 1 million jobs, the so-called Democratic press, the so-called left-leaning press, which used to be left-leaning back in the old days of the 1980s when I was working with it hand in glove and was resenting the fact that it was so lockstep and stereotypically political, is now a right-wing press. And as a consequence, it prints any of these simple parrot-like slogans that come out of Republicans' mouths. For example, and this is Pavlovian. You remember Pavlov? He discovered that dogs would salivate when you gave them food, and then he rang a bell before giving them food, and eventually when they got used to associating the bell with the food, they started salivating whenever you rang a bell. Okay, the Republicans have been using this principle to the nth degree, and they have in the last 6 months associated the concept of the super rich with a phrase called job creators. So that any time we do something to benefit the super rich, who, as you know, are poor souls starving out on street corners, it's called something we are doing for job creation and for job creators. And anything that is done to take 1 penny out of the pocket of a super rich person like Mitt Romney, who, poor baby, is making only $27 million a year. Does your heart cry out, TJ, for him? And is paying between 13.5% and 15% in taxes. Now, he may not actually be paying as much as 15% in taxes, because that is what he estimates his taxes to be this year, and Newt has not turned out to be a reliable estimator. Remember, he told us that his speaking fees came to pocket change. Do you remember what the actual figure was on that pocket change?
I think it was $375,000.
Yes, it was about between $372,000 and $378,000 a year. Poor baby! Go into a candy store and try to buy something nourishing when you are starving and haven't eaten for 2 weeks with only $378,000 in your pocket. And you will continue to starve, right?
I don't know how he makes it.
I don't know how he makes it either. And God, the man's position is so pathetic that anyone with a heart would reach out to touch him. Starving children in Africa, I'm sorry, they're wealthy compared to Mitt Romney. Or at least that's the vision of reality that we are being sold and we are buying. So if you read only the headlines, or even if you watch, look at me, I'm a diligent news watcher. I listen to the news on PBS. I watch the news on on PBS. I listen to NPR. I listen to the New York Times every day. I probably spend 2.5 to 3 hours per day consuming news. And yet, the stories give me the impression that, in fact, Barack Obama is creepingly socializing the entire American economy, that he is collectivizing, he's doing the old Marxist shtick of making everything part of the government. Look at the way he made even General Motors part of the government. And he did such a terrible job of destroying jobs at General Motors that General Motors became the world's leading automaker again this week. Obviously, the man is destroying jobs. Obviously, the man is socializing the American economy. And we're told this so many times that we believe it. We believe that General Motors rising to be once again the world's leading automaker is job destruction in action. Why? Because it's Obama. Now, a couple of days ago, Rick Santorum, actually it was yesterday, Rick Santorum was criticized because one of the people in one of his audiences said, well, I don't consider, she said, Barack Obama to be a legitimate president of the United States because according to the Constitution, to be a president of the United States, you have to be an American citizen. And I have seen proof that Barack Obama was not born in the United States and that he is a closet Muslim. And this week, 2 days before this person made this statement, I was sent proof positive from some Saudi prince of some sort, who's supposed to hang around with Percy Sutton, a guy that I actually used to spend some time with. And this prince is spilling the beans on Barack Obama's secret Muslimhood. Well, frankly, I get emails from both the left and the right. And the right has been building this absolute fantasy world about Obama for the last 2 years. Non-fact after non-fact after non-fact has been popping up. But it is very difficult to check on facts to see if they are facts or non-facts. And in fact, it is wise for all of us to be somewhat suspicious when new charges of this kind come up. Is it true or isn't it true? We really have to go and check it. But it seems to be the fact that it's not true. And the news media, actually, it was, what's his name, on CNN, Wolf Blitzer. Everybody's got to be a wolf or a fox these days. Wolf Blitzer is up against Fox TV. Who's going to win? And who can shout the loudest? So Wolf Blitzer criticized Rick Santorum for not criticizing this woman and saying, we all know that's not true. What Wolf Blitzer obviously doesn't get is that there is 50% of the country is getting news blasts every day in their email proving that, in fact, the president is a commie plant and his job is to Stalinize the American economy and strip all of us of every freedom we've ever had. The Patriot Act, of course, that came from George Bush was an act that freed us all. We all know that. However, we exaggerated that one. It wasn't taking away our civil liberties for the most part at all. And secondly, that the guy is a Muslim, period. He's out to do a secret jihad on America, a secret jihad using Stalinist tactics. Now, there's a new one for you. Only Gamal Abdel Nasser would have understood that, who tried to combine socialism with dictatorial Muslimhood. And this stuff is patently false, but Rick Santorum can't say it's false on stage because the audience of 200 people in that room would tear him limb from limb, because they all know it's true. They all know that Obama was not born in the United States, that Obama has never produced a birth certificate, that Obama was probably born in Indonesia or Afghanistan or someplace like that Obama was raised in a Muslim family, that Obama was sent here as a closet Marxist. A closet Marxist? I mean, remember, the really heavy-duty Muslim militants say every system of thought in the world is wrong with the exception of one. And that's the system of Islam. That's the only one that's right. Meaning the Marxist system is wrong, according to people like the late lamented Osama bin Laden. So there is a 50% of the country is walking around in a dream world created by, again, the big lie. The idea behind the big lie was, pick a lie, the more outrageous, Hitler said, the better, because the more people are going to believe it. And then repeat it over and over again. Super rich people are job creators. Give them lots more money. and they will create more jobs. Take money away from these poor babies, and we will all be unemployed and out on the street. Take money from your pockets. Give it to the super rich. They will create jobs. That's a return to American values. That's a return to the constitutional freedoms we were all guaranteed. This is Mitt Romney's speech. This is Newt Gingrich's speech. This is Rick Santorum's speech. And I got news for you, America. It's a lie! Okay, I got that off my chest. Maybe.
Partially.
Yeah, partially. So I'm trying to figure out what Newt Gingrich is offering in his 21st century contract with America. And of course he says it's jobs and security and a return to American greatness and all that kind of thing.
I wonder.
But,
that's a very unique platform. I've never heard a politician use any of those before.
No. Not a pot in every chicken and a house in every garage or something like that. At any rate, but if you read the speech, okay, you know that I have been promoting in my spare time the idea of radical centrism. It's time for us centrists to get angry already and say, fuck you to the extremists of the right and fuck you to the extremists of the left and start running this country. And get the Republicans and Democrats to talk to each other and either do something when they are in Congress to better this country, or get the hell out of Washington and let us vote in all new people. And the news media has to start living up to its obligation. Newt Gingrich is absolutely right when he attacks the news media. The news media are lazy. They repeat stereotypes. They do not investigate the facts. They do not, when a speech is given, they do not check the facts the way 2 years ago they did. Now they're not doing it anymore. They're not checking the facts to tell us who's lying and who's not, and what the real facts are. For example, Bain Capital. 2 weeks ago, when we were going to do a previous interview and then were doused by the flames of malfunctioning equipment, 2 weeks ago I was trying to study Bain Capital. I wanted to know one simple thing. Was Newt Gingrich right when he said that Bain Capital was a company of plunder, was a company that destroyed jobs, not made jobs? For all I know, he's wrong. For all I know, Mitt Romney has generated job after job after job after job. And this was 2 weeks after Newt had made this claim. And there was still no good expose. No good journalist had gone out and really looked into Bain Capital carefully, and none were able to answer the question. 2 days after I started looking on behalf of Howard the Humongous, which tries to give you the real truth all of the time, it's just we shout it, scream it, and try to make it into a joke. But aside from that, it's real. There was nothing that told you whether Bain Capital created jobs or destroyed jobs. Yes, there was an old story from a book that somebody had found in which Bain Capital had gone to Northern Timber or something like that, a great big timber company that owned a paper company called Ampad, and had bought Ampad for $5 million. Then what Bain Capital had done was used Ampad to raise $100 million. The next thing that it did was it charged Bain Capital a fee of $2.5 million a year. Now think about this, TJ. You've just bought a company for $5 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you want a fee per year of $2.5 million. You want half the company every year in a fee. How in the world is the company going to keep up with that? Meanwhile, every time there was a business transaction of some kind that involved Bain Capital, and Bain Capital was doing business transaction after business transaction with Ampad, Bain Capital got a percent. Now, that doesn't sound like much if they're only doing small operations, right? Well, they raised $100 million in capital on the basis of this $5 million company. They floated an IPO, that is, they floated a stock issue. They sold something like $100 million worth of stock. They borrowed a whole bunch of money. By the time it was all through, it was $100 million worth of money. And of course, Bain Capital got an undisclosed percentage of that. Well, let's imagine that it's the standard founder's fee, 5%, right? And that's very unlikely because Bain Capital really dug deeper into pockets than that. That would have been $5 million. Okay, they've just invested $5 million in a company, money they probably borrowed anyway, they are collecting a fee of $2.5 million a year, which means over 3 years they will collect $7.5 million. And they're taking a finder's fee of $5 million for the $100 million that they have raised. That's $12.5 million that Bain Capital has just milked from this tiny little company. So not only did they make their investment back, they doubled it. Now, the one thing you could say, and they folded the company.
Yeah.
After 3 years, the company went belly up, and all 4,000 employees lost their jobs. Now, look, what this amounts to is that Bain Capital and its partners, like Mitt Romney, got super rich. Now, TJ, think. We all know that the super rich are job creators, right?
They created the shit out of some jobs that day. Yeah.
Oh yes, they obviously
we created jobs by creating unemployment.
By throwing 4,000 people out of business. We threw 4,000 people out. We fired them. We gave them pink slips, but we created jobs.
Hey, wait a minute now. They created plenty of jobs at the pink slip manufacturer.
That's right.
And they need more people. They need more people to run the unemployment office now.
Yeah, exactly. See, job creation, just what we said. Now, the big problem is that Bain Capital claims to have been involved with 200 companies. And the question is, was this the exception or was this the rule? Because Mitt Romney is right about something. Capitalism is a risky business. Business is a risky business. Even in the Soviet Union, setting up state-owned companies was a risky business. A lot of them simply didn't work. That's why people had to stand in the streets for days just to get a pair of boots. And then the boots leaked. So, in an economic system, some things succeed and some things fail, no matter which system you are following. And so the real trick is to determine what happened with the rest of these companies, and on balance, whether Newt was, or Mitt, I can never keep Newt and Mitt straight, because what kind of humans walk around with names like Mitt and Newt?
There is some strange names floating around.
Well, there's strange names floating around. I have a theory, a hypothesis about why those strange names are floating around. These are prep school names. These are the names of kids who can be sent to places like Eton and whatever the names are of all of those wealthy schools where only super wealthy kids can go. That's about the only place on the planet where they have names like Mitt and Newt. In fact, one of my friends who comes from one of England's leading families and who I just discovered last week had been made an MBE by the Queen in 1999, my friend, what did we call him? Ah, yes, his prep school name was Dumbo. So Mitt and Newt are very lucky that they were not named Dumbo when they were in prep school, because they'd have a harder time making it to president. However, with the success the Republican apparatus has at producing the Pavlovian response that associates a bell to food and makes a dog salivate, they could easily have made us think that Dumbo was actually a name given to people who are remarkably bright.
I think I have a friend who just cannot even say Mitt. It just, no matter how many times he hears it,
I don't blame him.
He'll never do it. Every time he hears it, I mean, it's not even a matter of he refuses to say the word. It's that whenever he hears it, his mind is like, that's not a name. I'm gonna call him Milt. So every time he talks about Mitt Romney, he's like, I hate Mitt Romney. It's like,
well, I have the same problem, except what comes out of my mouth every time I try to say the word Mitt is Newt. And every time I try to say the word Newt, Mitt comes tumbling out.
That's actually considerably more confusing.
Now think about this for a second. Obviously, the spirit of the American Constitution was that people should have American names if they're going to be American presidents. Where is the certificate from Mitt and Newt proving that Mitt and Newt are American names? Obviously, these guys are plants. Obviously, they are white, Anglo-Saxon, aristocratic plants.
I just realized that if it comes down to Mitt Romney or Newt Gingrich, which it's definitely going to, then there's going to be a presidential race between two people whose names I've never met anyone in my day-to-day life that had. I've never met anyone named Barack. I've never met anyone named Newt. I've never met anyone named Mitt.
Yes. So, oh, God. Well, it shows you how incomprehensible the cosmos gets every 20 years or so. Welcome to old age.
Here's the thing I wanted to talk about. I know you're not. I know you're not.
Talk about something tonight? Oh my God!
Yeah.
I was prepared to talk.
I don't know if this is an observation that I know you're not a big sports fan, but I thought this was kind of indicative of something kind of strange in our culture. There was a big playoff game. It was I think the 49ers and the Giants, and the Giants won. The coach of the 49ers after the game was going to all his players and being like, "We didn't lose. You know, we may have lost the score, but we didn't lose the game."
Oh,
Something
God.
like this. So, so I'm thinking about this. I'm like, oh, that's kind of like how, Mitt Romney really didn't win in Iowa. I mean, well, it
Right.
On retrospect, it looks like Santorum actually got more votes.
Right.
It's like, no, I won. I still won.
That's not important. Yes. 78 votes doesn't count.
I won. I just, what is it with this?
Redefining reality.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it not just in politics and sports, but just like in day-to-day life. I notice people now seem to be very reluctant to admit failure anymore. Failure doesn't even exist now. It's just that's just a momentary hiccup on my path towards incredible success.
Okay, have I ever told you, and stop me if I've told you, have I ever told you my remarkable experience in 1962 and 1963 working in the graduate education department at Rutgers University, a very, very highly regarded graduate school when I hadn't even finished my freshman year of college, and they had me doing research? And I watched the American educational system being disemboweled in front of my very eyes. And it was being disemboweled by some very intelligent, very well-meaning people who were extremely kind to me. The head of the graduate education department and his cronies. And these people believed that facts are not important in an education. We should stop teaching kids facts because they'll pick up facts one way or the other anyway. Only one thing was really important in education: self-image.
Self-esteem, yeah.
Self-esteem, exactly. So they focused the entire education system under their aegis, all of the educational system that was under their control, on producing self-esteem. It was what you might call therapeutic education, psychotherapeutic education. And they produced one of the biggest stumbling blocks America has to success. Because if you don't recognize your failures, and if you don't agonize over your failures, and if you don't beat yourself up until you finally get those failures out of your system and find ways to get above, around, or beyond them, you will never get good at something. You need the carrot and the stick. And both the carrot and the stick have to be inside of you. Well, we have blown up the size of the carrot and doused it in sugar and coated it in honey and chocolate. And we have eliminated the stick. And without the stick, you don't get excellence. And America needs to be a country of excellence.
Yeah.
And one of the proofs of this,
but
I want to tell you one more little detail, which I probably already told you. Back in the days when I went through cross-cultural journals, from cover to cover, there were all kinds of studies demonstrating that on all these things on mathematics tests, America's came out 27th, Koreans, Japanese, and Chinese came out 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. On science tests, Americans came out 30th, but Koreans, Chinese, and Japanese came out 1, 2, and 3, etc. There was only one area in which America beat the Koreans, the Chinese, and the Japanese. It was in self-esteem. And in self-esteem, Americans were extremely high. What does that prove? Too much self-esteem is a poison. Remember the old Bloomism. Any good thing in excess is a poison. Life is a matter of balances, of recipes, balancing things against each other. The reason these guys were so good over in Japan, Korea, and China was because they felt failure intensely. If they got a 92 on a test that was graded by a 0 to 100, they felt miserable. And if they got 95, they felt almost as miserable. It wasn't until they got 100 that they felt good. We don't have that in America. We need it back again.
Yeah. I was going to... there was a bit by George Carlin where he basically pointed out that, the whole self-esteem thing doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. One of his examples was the fact that psychotic killers like Jeffrey Dahmer thought very highly of themselves and had remarkably good self-esteem. As it turns out, sociopaths and psychopaths actually think quite highly of themselves.
Right.
Of course, they were actually pretty motivated to succeed. Now that I think about it. Sorry, got a little bit of a cough going on there.
Another little trick here. The flip side of any good thing in excess is a poison, is that any poison in moderation is very likely to be a tonic. You poor baby, you're coughing your poor nose off. You're actually more like your larynx.
So dry in here.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, the point is that you need a certain flotation cushion of some kind to carry you through failure, because as what's his name, Edison said, Thomas Alva Edison, he said 1,000 failures are just 1,000 steps toward your success. And those men who end up as failures are usually men who stopped trying too soon. In other words, something has to sustain you while you go through your 1,000 failures that are actually steps on your stages toward success. So you need a balance between self-criticism, which you really have to have. I mean, I've watched people, especially recently, who have no sense of self-criticism whatsoever, and making mistakes does not bother them in the least. They need to be bothered, for God's sakes.
I feel like that's the big issue for me. Just I read people's blogs, and I meet a lot of people, and I read a lot of people's tweets on Twitter, or read their blogs on Tumblr, or just encounter them. You watch their videos on YouTube here and there. And that's probably my biggest concern, is that it seems like everyone just thinks they're incredible. No one, if something bad happens in their life, whose fault was it? I got to figure out someone to blame for this. It certainly wasn't me.
Right.
And even the people who do have some sort of ability to blame themselves, immediately they seek to go on the internet and get people to tell them it wasn't really their fault.
Right.
I feel like this is my fault. I'm depressed. Have you considered that it really might be your fault? Did that ever cross your mind? That it's not just depression? It might actually be you.
We do things that jangle us. And when we do things that jangle us, we need to rush into the arms of other humans to get reassurance. So what you're seeing is it's not just natural, it's not just humans, but it's chimps that do it. When chimps do something that doesn't feel right to them, or that makes them feel just a little bit strange, they come rushing back to get hugs from other chimps. They need the reassurance. But it's a balance of reassurance and radical insecurity, and a willingness to step into past the bounds of radical insecurity that makes a social system an exploratory device, and that makes a human life interesting. The willingness to step beyond boundaries into territories that are radically uncomfortable. Yes, you need to come rushing back to other humans and get a hug, but then you need to step back out into the unknown again.
My only addendum to that is that anyone listening to this, the next time you fuck up, or the next time you suspect you might have fucked up, just consider the possibility that you really did, and it's not just because you're depressed and you're down on yourself.
Right, yes, absolutely.
Consider the possibility that is objectively true, because...
Okay, well, Kenny Laguna, I've probably told you this one too. Kenny Laguna, Joan Jett's manager, who was sort of like a member of the family to me. Kenny used to say, and you've heard this expression before, fuck me once, shame on you. Fuck me twice, shame on me. Meaning, if I don't learn from a fuck up, the fault is mine. I need to learn the very first time I screw up, so that the second time, the third time, the fourth time, and the 120th time, I get it right. That puts a big obligation on all of us, but it's an extremely important obligation if you want to have a life that means something to your fellow human beings and means something to you.
What do you think about this campaign slogan for Obama's 2012 re-election? I think, a lot of people, he can't run on change again, obviously.
Right. Yes, get me out of office. Help! Change. I'm trapped in the White House.
I think his I think his re-election campaign should be something that maybe not these exact words. In fact, definitely not these exact words, but something that basically says, "Holy shit, that other guy's crazy. Better vote for Obama."
Well, how about shame you can believe on? And that's what we've just been talking about. You can't run on that, obviously. What basically, it's true. The apocalypse is coming. If Newt or Mitt make it into the White House, their plan is to follow exactly the same policies that George Bush followed. And what do those policies give us? They gave us a multi-trillion-dollar debt, the biggest debt in American history. They gave us a crash. They gave us a staunch of jobs, a loss of jobs that apparently started around 2006, because in the last year we've apparently had the greatest job production rate since 2006. In other words, they crashed the country. Now, one thing to be very aware of, one thing Barack Obama said tonight, everything he said tonight, I believe is true, with the exception of one thing, and that is that he was making corrections to the economic system to guarantee that we would never have a crash again. Well, TJ, we've been having crashes since 1625. That's a long time. And the Romans used to have crashes, and the ancient Chinese used to have crashes, and bacteria have crashes. So guaranteeing that we will never have a crash again is absolutely impossible no matter who's in office, and to an extent I am not being totally truthful when I am calling this a Republican crash, because whoever was in the White House when that thing was going to happen was going to take the blame. But certainly, giving huge tax reductions with no way to pay for it, starting 2 wars with no ways to pay for it, and then putting it all on the tab and blaming it on Obama, who wasn't around for any of this, who wasn't in the White House for any of this. That's the height of despicable dishonesty.
Let's talk about Newt Gingrich for a second here.
Okay.
Now, Newt Gingrich, he was kind of his win in South Carolina was kind of unexpected.
Totally.
And a lot of it owed to his debate performance, I guess, 2 days before the vote. And the way that debate began was he was asked about his asking his second wife for an open marriage or whatever.
Right.
And his answer was basically like, "How dare you ask me that question?"
Right.
And the audience was like, "Yeah, how dare you ask him that question? We too are indignant."
Right.
How do you get away with running on family values, traditional family values? Like, if you're a man if this was like a libertarian candidate and it was like, "Oh, you asked your wife for an open marriage," it'd be a non-issue to I think everyone, nearly everyone. But when you're a family values candidate and you're like, "I'm evangelical and I'm Christian and I believe this and I believe that," and then there's like, "Oh, yeah, baby, I need you to give me permission to stick my dick in whoever I please, because I just need that to function." It's like, all right, you can't have it both ways, motherfucker. You know, are you going to be you can't be a personal libertarian and then a fascist when everyone else is concerned. I don't see that as working. And the great thing was, as soon as he did his little angry speech about how dare anyone bring it up, the moderator immediately backs off and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. That was something another network said, and we're real sorry we brought that up, and wow, we feel bad now. We're sorry, Newt."
There are a bunch of I got to stop interrupting you. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm done. Go ahead.
All right. No, there are a whole lot of things in play here. First of all, this is an election unlike any other in American history because we have had 17 Republican debates. And no one has commented on that fact. In other words, no one is saying, "Hey."
Oh, I did. I'm just going to stop you for a second say that I have repeatedly been like, "Why the fuck do we need this many debates?" Has it only been 17? It really feels like more. I really feel like every possible moment of every possible day a Republican debate is going on.
Right.
Like, well, that's how much do you motherfuckers have to debate? I wasn't aware that you needed that much time to just repeat the mantra of, "We're evil cocksuckers" over and over and over. Well, I'm probably being a little bit too partisan there. Never mind. Go ahead.
No, it is diabolically clever, and it should continue in the future. But what's diabolically clever about it is that in advertising terms, if paying for 1 minute on CNN costs, I don't know what, $100,000 or something like that these days. And the Republicans, by doing this series of 17 debates, have gotten themselves the equivalent of approximately $170 million worth or more of exposure on American television. It's probably more like $250,000 to $500,000 worth of exposure on television. Now, nobody's noting that fact, but it's diabolically clever, and it does give us a chance to evaluate the candidates. But what are we really evaluating when we're evaluating the candidates? We think we are evaluating their position. We think we are evaluating their philosophy. We think we are evaluating their track record because we think we are rational beings. But TJ, this even applies to me. We're not rational at all. What we're really measuring
no one but me. No one but me.
Yes, only TJ is able to really see through all of this. But we are measuring what are called dominance and submission cues. And the fact, now Mitt Romney was giving off dominance cues to the nth degree up until the latest debate, because he looked remarkably poised, remarkably confident, remarkably unflustered, and he had a good sense of humor in the way that he answered every charge that was made against him. He was brilliant at saying nothing, because in essence he told us nothing. But he didn't need to tell us anything. We were reading his body language without understanding that's what we were reading. Then suddenly, when the issue of his taxes came up, this last week, Newt has been giving off, and he doesn't even know it, he's been giving off submission gestures. And you can see it in his face. There are little worry giveaways in his face that show that he's not confident anymore, that he's feeling on the defensive. Well, we pick up on that in our gut. We pick up on that as body language, where it doesn't matter what he's saying, it's how he's saying it. And when Newt took that question and showed utter confidence, and beyond utter confidence showed anger and bluster, are these submission gestures or dominance gestures? They're dominance gestures.
Yeah, obviously.
And when he out-dominanced the John, whatever his name was, the moderator, he won that debate. He won the debate against the moderator. He won that debate for the rest of the evening because he had just shown bigger dominance cues than anybody else in the room. He'd just shown more balls. He'd just shown more confidence. He had just shown more ability to bring his strength together, to rally his strength under attack. And that's really what we're looking for. Somebody who will rally strength under attack, because that's what leaders primarily, or it's one of the major function of a leader, is to stand up to the leaders of other countries, like, for example, little Ahmadinejad, who's developing his nukes and his 10,000-mile range missiles that can reach the United States very, very rapidly. And this is a matter of who's going to be able to face down Ahmadinejad and the guy over his head, Sistani. So that's how debates are basically won and lost. Body language, dominance gestures versus submission gestures. Oh my God. That's it. That's the real language of political debate.
Now, what do you make of the stragglers in this party? The people the two guys who really don't have a chance, but they're still tagging along. I'm talking, of course, about Rick Santorum and Ron Paul. We've already talked about Ron Paul in a lot of detail in other ones, but we haven't really ever had a chance to talk about Rick Santorum, and this might be our last chance because he's kind of not that great.
There's not a lot to talk about. Rick Santorum, watch his facial gestures. There's no way he's ever going to be, at least not in this 4-year cycle, there is no way he's going to be president of the United States. There's no way he's going to be candidate for president of the United States, because his face constantly looks extremely serious, extremely dour, and it looks submissive. He doesn't look up. He looks a little bit down, but it's in the strange little wrinkles. There's a guy named Paul Ekman out in San Francisco who's a major research on what he calls facial microgestures, and he's got a CD, if you can ever get your hands on it, that shows 32 microgestures. They're little facial things that are almost impossible to see, but they telegraph everything. And Rick Santorum doesn't have the confidence, the presence, the charisma, the sense of self-control, and the sense of self-importance to be a presidential candidate. Mitt Romney has it up the kazoo. He just doesn't have any substance. I mean, yes, he's shown us that he can make scads of money for himself. And in all probability, he can run the country to make scads of money for the super rich. He can make them even super richer. But whether he can do anything for the ordinary citizens of the United States, who he thinks are going to go around making $10,000 bets with each other over whether a frog is about to go belly up or not, and who thinks that $378,000 in a year is pocket change, the idea that he could ever do anything for you and me is somewhat ludicrous. And Newt, it's the Mitt and Newt problem again. and Newt has all the balls in the world. I mean, this guy, because one of the reasons he's got all the balls in the world is because he's honest. He tells you what he thinks. And he's about to make a speech this week that is going to possibly turn the tables. Because the one thing that I like about Mitt, aside from his utter honesty, even when he's saying things that I think are utterly despicable, at least he's authentic. At least it comes from the gut. And he's got a brain. There's no guarantee that anybody else here has a brain. The only guarantee that Mitt has a brain is the fact that he's making $27 million a year. And the fact that he did incredibly well. I mean, one year he almost doubled if you had doubled your money. In other words, if you had invested $1 with Bain Capital, you would have gotten $1.78 back at the end of the year. That's an extraordinary payoff. Obviously, Mitt has got a brain in there. But whether it's a brain that only plunders or does anything constructive is very, very hard to tell. And Newt is about to make a speech on the Space Coast of Florida, which is what the coast of Florida that has Cape whatever it's called these days, Cape Kennedy, Cape Canaveral, God knows what they call it. But the launch pad, where everything flies, goes up into space. He's about to make a speech there. Now, Newt has been a futurist, an avid futurist for 25 years. And that's why stupid Newt was able to pick out a few things that Newt had written in a 1982 and 1984 book about getting all our energy from space and bringing it down to Earth and other impossible dreams like that, and said that this demonstrated that Mitt was a lunatic. No, Mitt was not a lunatic. Mitt was a visionary. I mean, Newt was a visionary, and Mitt was demonstrating that he doesn't understand what visionaries are all about. And Newt.
This is going to get kind of confusing.
Yes, it's going to get very confusing. Newt is about to make a speech at Kennedy Space Center, and he's about to lay out his vision for space, and it's going to be a vision that he believes with all of his heart and soul, and it's going to be rousing as all hell, and it's going to be his attempt to capture the flag that John Kennedy planted on the moon. In other words, when John Kennedy told us we are going to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard, and he lifted our eyes to a distant destination, and he said we are capable of achieving this, he did something that galvanized this country. And Newt is about to try the same thing, even though in certain ways he's about to plunder this country. And the irony is that the guy who has put forth a space policy that is absolutely superb is Barack Obama. But since Barack doesn't know how to mouth a slogan over and over and over again the way the Republicans do, people have forgotten it, and people have come to believe, we've discussed this, the Darth Vaders of the military-industrial space complex put out the most... Look, in a lifetime where I spent a lot of time around press people, and I spent 17 years in PR. Yes, it was my science experiment, but it was for real. And I saw hoaxes, absolute hoaxes floated, which I then tried to puncture. But I've never seen a lie as big as the lie that the industrial space complex tried to float when they said that Obama was killing the space program, when it was George Bush, their man, who had killed the space program by giving us no manned access to space on an American vehicle for 5 years. America cannot put a human from America into space on an American space vehicle right now. That's been true ever since the shuttle retired. It will be true for at least 5 years and possibly 10 years unless Obama's program is followed for the space policy, or we'll have to see what Newt has to deliver. Newt may have a plan too, but this is shameful. You know the old Bloom slogan, a country that looks up goes up, a country that looks down goes down. We are looking down so far that we are about to bury ourselves.
I don't know if we're looking. I don't even know if we're looking down at this point. I think we might just be looking in the mirror. Just
We are.
not
and that's the
not like the whole country looking in a mirror and reflecting, but every individual just looking in a mirror and saying like, "Yeah, I'm awesome."
right. Well,
And at least Newt Gingrich has got high self-esteem, though. That's
yes,
that's
he
good.
has high.
He's got
but
that. He's got that high self-esteem and probably the same, 27th in math or whatever.
Well,
all
he's
this-
earned self-esteem. He's a very intelligent, very articulate man. Even if you and I think that what he stands for is enough to make
I
fun.
hear that a lot. I don't see a lot of evidence of that. I don't know. Maybe maybe I've missed those speeches. I don't know. Gingrich. I don't know. I look at his face, and I know that I know you're not supposed to judge, about like appearance or anything like that. But of course,
Right.
everyone does anyway.
Yes, we all do.
And I just look at him. I'm like, God, do I really want to look at that face for 4 years?
Oh God!
Like, do I really want to see it? Because, like, I just look at him, and he has an incredibly punchable face. And I better say that before he's president, if he does become president. Because once he becomes president, then that's probably
And he'll-
illegal to say. I don't know.
By the Secret Service for an assassination attempt.
Right? I better say it now before that's
Yes.
the case. He does. He has a very punchable face. I don't know.
And
I'm not an inherently violent person, but
But there are studies of this kind of thing, and what at least Westerners tend to look for in a face is a strong jaw, which of course Mitt has to the nth degree, and strong cheekbones, which Mitt has to the nth degree. Mitt has the perfect face. Obama does not have the perfect face, and certainly Newt does not have the perfect face. But if presidents were voted in on face alone, Mitt would win. There's another trick, and you've probably heard this. There were a lot of studies back in the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s about the relationship of height to people's impression of somebody. And it turns out that when you're looking at somebody 6'2" or 6'4", and you know this from you don't know this from experience, but you should, because you're 6 foot God knows what.
7.
But 6'7"? Oh my God! I'm a shrimp. I'm an inch and a half high. But of course, the camera is very flattering to me. It makes me look like I'm 2.5 inches. But at any rate, and we're not discussing any private parts here. But
I wasn't going to go there. But
yes,
see,
well,
you have a dirtier mind than I do.
right,
That's just
right.
proof right there.
So, but at any rate, here's how the studies are set up. You get a group of college students together in one classroom and another group of college students together in another classroom. And you have a person paraded into the room for them all to take a look at. And you have a biography in front of every one of them that tells his background. But in the two different classrooms, it's exactly the same biography. The difference is that into one room you send somebody who's 6'3", and into the other room you send somebody who's 5'6". Now, then you ask the students to guesstimate the IQ of the person they have just seen. Now, guess what happens? The people who've seen the guy who's 6'3" estimate his IQ at, let's say, 120, and the people in the room who've seen a guy who's 5'6" with exactly the same biography, of course it's a phony biography, but still, it's exactly the same biography, estimate his IQ to be 10 points lower. And the same thing applies in presidential campaigns. Almost invariably, the taller candidate of the two wins. Almost all the time. What does that tell you about the deep intelligence and cognitive skills of Americans as they evaluate potential presidents? What does it tell you about the deep thought they give to the platforms of the two candidates and the extent to which the two platforms are likely to benefit them and their country in the next 4 years?
Well, you never know. Maybe there might be. As a tall person, I have to be open to the possibility that tall people are just better.
Well, let's look at it from a scientific point of view. There's less oxygen up there where you are. Your brain is obviously killing more brain cells. You couldn't possibly be as bright as short people like me.
Touche.
So what's our next topic for tonight? Newt should lead us to lizards, but there's nothing new in the lizard department that I've seen in the science.
I don't know.
This week.
I don't know. I just I was watching I've been sick to death of politics because I've had to make so many videos about it, and I sat down. I mean, for the last 4 days, I've just been dry, unable to make any sort of videos because I just feel uninspired by anything that's going on. And I've been talking about politics for the longest time now, and I keep trying to re-spark my interest. And I just sat there and I'm like, when an average people, when poor people, when lower middle class people have these sorts of dramas, they have. You fathered a child, in secret. You left your wife because she has cancer. You had, abortions, even though you're a staunch pro-lifer.
Right. Oh, did he have abortions?
Santorum, I think his wife had an abortion.
Aha! Very interesting.
So there's all these things. Okay, but if you're a normal person and that stuff happens, we put you on. Jerry Springer's not on the air anymore, but we put you on some daytime talk show, and the whole world laughs at you because you're just the lowest form of trash.
Right.
Oh my God, what a disgusting fucking we all judge him. And then if you're a rich guy that does that same stuff and has that same level of drama in your life, you're just and we push you on TV because you're probably a politician. You're famous.
Well, I think you just come up with a brilliant idea. The next debate, the next Republican debate, should be hosted by Jerry Springer, and we should have couches instead of podiums. And Mitt and Newt, of course, should have the most prominent places, and the entire thing should be about their tawdry sex lives and about their tawdry bank accounts and how they made their money. And we might learn an awful lot more about the candidates.
Just an all-scandal debate. No pretense of discussing the issues.
That's right. Bring back Morton Downey Jr., too. So that the two of them, Jerry Springer and Morton Downey Jr., can bring every worm out of the can in the closet.
Now that sounds like a debate that people would watch. That would be the highest rated of the 17 debates thus far.
Well, but there's another thing to watch out for. We've been paying so much attention to local stuff. Even I have spent, normally I cram for Howard the Humongous episodes, aside from, the 2.5 hours of news that I take in every day and absolutely nonstop taking of science and all of the rest of that stuff. I cram, and I usually cram by going to a Sharq al-Awsat in Saudi Arabia to see their take on things, and Pravda to see their take on things, and a whole bunch of sources that the audience is never likely to look at because they have very, very interesting perspectives. This time I crammed entirely on American material. I read all 3 State of the Union speeches that Obama has given, and we'll go back to those in a minute, but the thing that was really catching the corner of my eye was the Arab Spring and what's happening with the Arab Spring. Have you been following what's happening with the Arab Spring in Egypt and the fact that it's impossible to follow what's happening in Tunisia where it all began?
Well, I know that in Egypt it's pretty much been an Islamist takeover.
Absolutely. Total Islamist takeover. Yesterday the new parliament was seated.
I think they said something like 70%.
Yes, between the Muslim Brotherhood, which is now regarded, even by apparently Obama, as centrist, and is not. I mean, the first principle in the creed of the Muslim Brotherhood is the first principle of Islam is jihad. And they do not mean a spiritual inward struggle. They mean a struggle to take over the world by military means. And that's no kidding. We cannot laugh that. Out of existence. Obama may pretend over and over again that this is somehow moderation, but it is anything but moderation. And then there are the Salafists, and the Salafists make the Muslim Brotherhood look like men of peace. They make the Muslim Brotherhood look like Mahatma Gandhi, saints, because they want to slit even more throats. And this is extremely disturbing, and I'm sure it's extremely disturbing to Ghanem, whatever his name was, the poor baby from Google, who helped start all of this, and to all of those very moderate, very modern Twitterists and Facebookists who started this whole thing to begin with. In fact, you've just given me an idea. It's been some time It's been approximately 3 weeks since I last went on the website that Ghanem and his group maintain, and I haven't had a chance to see their take on things, but I'm even more frightened of Tunisia, because we're not told anything about Tunisia that seems to mean that Tunisia is probably even worse than Egypt, and that press people don't dare hang out there. It's so bad. Otherwise, they would be reporting on it. So there's this vast movement around the world. The world is filled with change right now. People in the street are more aware than they've ever been in our lifetimes, more aware than they've been ever since 1968, that they can take power into their own hands if they only take to the street. But revolutions can sometimes produce monstrosities and nightmares. Look what happened to the French Revolution, which was all about brotherhood, fraternity, equality, and I forget what the third was. But it was all good things. It was all wonderful things. And all those wonderful things ended up with 40,000 people having their heads lopped off in the public squares of Paris. It ended up as a nightmare for and a bloodbath for absolutely everybody, including the poor and the middle class, the very people who started it. So we really have to keep our eyes on revolutions. Once we start them, we're irresponsible if we cheer them on and then stop watching them once we think they're finished, because they are not finished. They finish themselves over the course of 5 years. And it's like taking a baby out into the middle of an 8-lane highway and to show him how dangerous traffic is, and then leaving him there. I mean, the baby's going to be splatted within seconds. You don't do that. And revolution is just as dangerous as leaving a 3-year-old on an 8-lane highway. We have a responsibility, and we're not living up to it. And not that we have any ability to influence these nations, and they do reserve their own autonomy and all of that stuff, but we're in an awkward position here, and we do have a certain responsibility, because we did cheer these things on just as we're cheering them on in Syria right now. And every night you hear reports of how many people the opposition say that the government has killed. But you don't hear any discussion of who the opposition is. None. No analysis of how accurate the opposition's information is. No comparison of how well people would do under the opposition versus how they are doing under, what's his name, Assad. No looks to Tunisia and Egypt to try to get a sense of what is likely to be in store if Syria's government is toppled. None of that is examined. None of it at all. And it's our responsibility to be aware of these things, because we are cheering things on that could result in catastrophes.
It seems like more often than not they kind of do. I don't know. I guess that it's just the case that if a country is unstable enough to lead to a revolution, then chances are the extremist forces that promulgated the revolution to begin with are not likely to become moderate when they take power.
Well, revolution is a violent act.
Yeah.
And even though the revolutions of today are far less violent than revolutions 150 or 200 years ago, or even the revolutions of the 1820s, the revolutions of 1848, they're not as oriented toward having people out in the streets with arms. They're more influenced by Gandhi and by Martin Luther King. The fact is, there are people out there throwing firebombs, there are people out there throwing stones. Once upon a time, the only way that humans killed other humans was by throwing stones at them. It's lethal. It's lethal. It's not peaceful protest once you start throwing stones at your fellow human beings. And in a red in tooth and claw jungle, which is a situation that a revolution produces, he who is reddest in tooth and claw, who is the most willing to use violence, wins. And that's a recipe for, again, bloodbath and nightmare. TJ?
I'm here.
Ah, good. Okay. You're still
I just
awake.
Wasn't sure what to say. I was like,
Yes.
I want to say something deep and poignant here, and then I just kind of drifted off, like, oh shit, nothing's coming.
Oh God. Well, we have to keep our eyes on these things. But another thing that nobody's paying any attention to is this: America was criticized extremely heavily during the Bush era for the fact that we were lone gunmen walking into town on our own and trying to solve all of the world's problems with a 6-shooter. we were unilateralists in those days.
Mhm.
And Barack Obama came to power claiming that he was going to reconstruct teamwork, working together with other countries to accomplish things. Well, right now we are in a standoff with Iran over their rapid development of nuclear weapons and their rapid development of the missiles with which to take those nuclear weapons and lay them in New York, Washington, and Houston. And what the world is not giving any attention to is the fact that Barack Obama has brought together England, France, and the United States, plus the entire EU, to condemn Iran and to cut it off financially. And it's working. It wouldn't work if America were doing this on its own. Now, it's not working to stop the nuclear weapons, but certainly Barack Obama is giving the peaceful approach to things an all-out college try. And somebody is using another smart approach, which Barack Obama broadcast in his speech tonight. In essence, Barack Obama said in his speech, without being able to say this as bluntly as he would have liked, look, we had a problem in Afghanistan with a guy named Osama bin Laden and a group that was supporting him called the Taliban. So we sent in 160,000 American soldiers, and it cost us over $500 billion. And what did it get us? Under George Bush, nothing. Osama bin Laden was still on the loose. We hadn't found him. The Taliban was over in Pakistan doing whatever it wanted to do and just waiting to take over the country on whatever day it was that we chose to leave. And then we took an even bigger hammer to smash a mosquito, a giant mallet, and we tried to whack Iraq for no reason that anybody could see, except that we thought that maybe they had weapons of mass destruction. And indeed, there was some evidence that was apparently fed to us by Iranian intelligence that they did have weapons of mass destruction. So we overreacted, and we sent in another 175,000 troops or so. And this time we jerked the total ante for the two wars up to between $1 and $3 trillion, depending on who's doing the counting. And what Barack Obama said is, look, we found a smarter way. You know, what does it cost to send in a bunch of Navy SEALs, including all the costs, the training of the SEALs, the building of the helicopters, the fuel for the helicopters to take out Osama bin Laden? Okay, let's say it costs $200 million. Is $200 million a savings over $1.5 trillion?
Obviously.
It's an enormous bargain. And we're doing the same to Al-Qaeda leaders all over the place, including in Somalia right now. And it's costing us a pittance by comparison with what these massive Republican wars were costing us, the wars that bankrupted us, the wars that gave us our multi-trillion-dollar debt. Now, my Republican friends, and I have many of them, and my conservative friends, and I have many of them, will probably never talk to me again after this broadcast. But hey, fuck you. The truth is the truth.
I like that. that should oh man, what's a oh well, I had something I was going to say and it just totally fell out of my head.
So here's Barack Obama being accused of being the wimp on national security issues.
Right.
We actually did get rid of Osama bin Laden, much as I hate to give him credit for much of anything.
And pretty much, I don't think Gaddafi would be gone without the NATO support either. So I think you could give Obama.
Yes,
I think you could give Obama a little credit for that one as well.
Not only a little credit, but leading from behind worked. I don't care what the Republicans say when they make fun of leading from behind. Leading from behind meant that in an effort that probably cost somewhere in the range of $250 billion, we only had to spend $100 million or something of the sort because the British and the French shouldered the rest of the burden. That's smart. That saves us from bankrupting ourselves. The Republican way of doing it, let's all do it by ourselves or let's not get involved at all, those two are problematic, very problematic because, okay, one of the things that's bothering me about the current Republican campaigns is that every Republican candidate says that he or she, in the case of Michelle Bachmann and her, remember her, is going back to the values of the American Constitution. And it's been very hard for me to figure out what those values are. I mean, remember, the American Constitution was written by a bunch of atheists. It was written by a bunch of, quote, free thinkers, which is the name for atheists actually 50 years later. But these were guys who did not believe in, these were not standard Christians by any stretch of the imagination. They believe in pantheism. They basically believe that nature was God. So what are these people seeing in a constitution that was written by a bunch of, at best, pantheists? And it turns out there's only one thing they see as a basic American value, so far as I've been able to discern by listening to these people over and over again, and that is, in God we trust, which is actually on a bill, a dollar bill, not in the Constitution. And Ben Franklin actually did believe in a God enough to introduce the idea of a prayer every day to start congressional sessions and sessions of the constitutional congresses, apparently, off. So there was one guy who believed in a God, more or less, in this bunch. But I am scared shitless to discover what the rest is of what these constitutionalists, like Michelle Bachmann, Rick Santorum, Mitt Romney, and Newt Gingrich, think are the basic principles of the Constitution.
The Constitution seems mighty pliable, doesn't it?
Well, there's one thing that we know. Aside from God, there's one thing we know they believe in. Freedom consists of the ability to have a gun so your 6-year-old can blow his little sister's five-year-old sister's brains out. That we know. That's a basic American freedom.
No, freedom is the freedom of the most important people, which is remember, corporations are people under Mitt Romney's logic.
Those are the
people who need freedom.
Yes. We
need to give freedom to the job creators.
Now, let me say something else very prejudiced, okay? But this is based on lots of research. The question you raised, the question of why Newt Gingrich was able to get away with saying "shame on you" to John, whatever his name was, the other day for bringing up the idea that he was screwing around on his wife and abandoning a wife who had cancer, right? Well,
don't forget he abandoned his other wife when she had MS.
Right. Well,
that's important too.
Well, the deal goes something like this. These debates were primarily being filmed to focus on South Carolina. South Carolina is in the Bible Belt. South Carolina is in the South. Statistics on the South are very interesting. Southern culture is very different from Northern culture.
Hey, I live in Louisiana. You don't have to tell me.
Okay, well, I'm going to repeat it anyway, what the research says, and you could tell me whether this is right or wrong.
Right.
But Northern culture is a shame culture, where you control yourself. Southern culture is a warrior and a guilt culture. Other people keep you under control. If somebody insults you in a bar in the North, you go home and sulk. And if somebody insults you in a bar in the South, you go home and get your gun and you come back and blow his brains out. Or you've lost your virtue. You've lost your manlyhood. You've lost your honor. And the South is remarkable for espousing a religion, Christianity, evangelical Christianity, that's all about family values and never living up to them. The South is where the most screwing around in the country takes place. The South is where the most adultery takes place. But there's a where the most murder takes place.
Yeah, actually, Louisiana has the highest church attendance of any state and the highest homicide rate of any state. So.
Well, there you go.
So we're number one in two different categories.
The big trick to evangelical Christianity is that you can be born again. You can be redeemed. You can be saved. You can lead a life of violent sin and screw every woman in sight 4 times a day up until the time you're 42 years old, and you can kill a dozen men. And then you can come to the church and say, I have been saved in the name of Jesus. I have been reborn through Jesus' suffering on the cross and his redemptive power for us. I now believe. I now see the light. And you will be absolved of every sin that you've ever had. And of course, because you're a Southerner, there's a small chance you will have far more sins than people in other parts of the country. So when
you make it all sound so appealing.
Yes. So Newt, who he represented Alabama or Georgia, or I can never keep my Southern states straight. Shows you how prejudiced I am. But when Newt was basically saying, hey, I'm a Christian and we get absolved. He was doing something profoundly Southern Baptist, Southern Christian, Southern Evangelical. And the South warmed to it. And we all warmed, as I said, to his overwhelming chutzpah, which comes across in the terms of ethology, the study of animals in the wild, as dominance gestures.
Yeah,
Fuck I remember you, John. How dare you ask that question?
I was in a diner the other day, maybe a couple weeks ago, and there was this old guy who was obviously like an old Republican, and he said, he was talking to some other people, and he basically like, I don't know why the Republicans need all these debates. It doesn't really matter who they nominate. I'd vote for like a homeless man under a bridge. Anyone to get Obama out of there.
Right.
I don't care who it is.
Well, it's the Obama myth. It's the myth of Obama as the ultimate monster. I mean, way back in the 1800s, you know how Englishmen used to get their children to eat their porridge? They would say, if you don't eat that, Boney is going to get you. Do you have any idea of who Boney was?
No.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
Ah.
Bonaparte was the monster. There's always a resident monster in a culture that you use to shake your children with fear to the very soles of their feet. And the resident monster in Republican homes is Barack Obama. He is no longer a human. He no longer is somebody about whom legitimate information must be processed. He's no longer a human about whom you are required to figure out whether the information you're given is legitimate or not. He is a monster, simply a monster. So any negative thing that is said about him, you add to the stack of things that you know with all your heart about Obama. But I have to admit, coming from the left, sort of, to the extent that I come, because I loathe the left, and I loathe the right, and I loathe them for extremism, and I want radical centrism, for God's sake, something that makes sense. But aside from that, the fact that I am a registered Democrat, in the old days, first we turned Johnson into a monster because we disagreed with his war in Vietnam. So anything negative that was said about Johnson, we believed, and we just kept piling up the negatives. And then came Richard Nixon, and we did it to him in spades. And anything negative we heard about him, we were willing to believe. We never checked our facts about either of them. And right now, what we used to do over on the Democratic side of things to Nixon and Johnson, the Republicans are doing to Obama. He's no longer a human. He's the monster who will come and eat your child alive if your child doesn't eat his Wheaties.
Yeah, but to be fair to you guys, Johnson was pretty horrible. So.
Well, but remember, Johnson brought in the most advanced civil rights bill in history. Johnson did advance a program to do something for the poor, for God's sakes, and that is a constituency that every civilization is aware of its need to take care of. Islam, one of the biggest virtues of Muslim civilization is that Muslim civilization demands that you be generous to the poor. Jewish civilization demands that you be generous to the poor. And I'm reading right now about Kung civilization, Kung San. I'm reading more information. My friend Chris Bohm, who is the head of the Jane Goodall Research Center and used to do research on chimpanzees with Jane Goodall, but as an anthropologist, he's got a book coming up called Moral Origins, and it's terrific so far. And he is telling me about the extent to which hunter-gatherers, like the Inuit, the Eskimos, we used to call them, and the Kung San in the Kalahari Desert, feel that benevolence, that generosity toward those who are in need is an absolute necessity if you're going to be a human being. So the need for generosity is there everywhere. And here Johnson came along and he institutionalized that by giving us a war on poverty. Now, I thought a lot of the war on poverty was a crock because I lived in slums. It was the only place I could afford to live. In order to have the freedom to think to think the thoughts you want, you have to live cheap. And that meant living in slums. And what I was watching was there were actually people who are slum makers, and there are people who pass the gift of slum making on to their kids. People who deliberately put holes in walls, people who will deliberately run an electrical cable out to the hall to wire it into the electrical line before it hits the meter. Do you know what happens in homes where people do that a lot?
Mm-mm.
The houses burn down. And it's because these are New York tenements with 8 families in them. That means one family, in order to save $22 on electrical bills a month, kills all of his neighbors and his own kids. Because I was in one of these buildings. I needed to rent a new apartment. The woman I was living with was throwing me out. She said, either you marry me or else. Women are very strange that way. And even liberated women, they don't stay liberated long, or they don't want to stay liberated long, and in some cases. And so I was going to have to find my own apartment. Now, I had been sharing an apartment on the Lower East Side with my wife, Linda, my non-wife, Linda, with the one I was living with, and it cost us $23 a month, and we split it between the two of us. So she paid $11.50 a month, and I paid $11.50 a month. That's not bad, right? Except that when you went to sleep at night and turned out the lights, an army of cockroaches came out as if they were a blanket, and they rippled over you. They rippled over everything. They took total command of the place. And the other problem was that somebody was shot on the block every single week. Another small problem was that if you were a writer and you bought a typewriter, there were people on rooftops using binoculars to see who had new goods that you could steal and pawn for drugs, and your typewriter would last approximately 2 weeks. I lost 7 bicycles in that neighborhood, all used, $25 each. But I went looking for a new apartment because Linda was throwing me out. I didn't want to get married. And I went to a building that was just a block away in the same terrible, terrible neighborhood, the most violent neighborhood, one of the most violent neighborhoods in New York City. And I went to a building that the landlord, supposedly a slumlord, the landlord had put tons of money into renovating. And he had renovated 7 out of 8 apartments. And his super, who took me through the building to show me an apartment for a whopping $45, that's twice as much as I'd been spending. Actually, it's 4 times as much as I've been spending. Was very proud of what he and the landlord had been doing to renovate this building. He was extremely proud of these incredible apartments that they had turned the place into. But there was one family that was there on rent control. In other words, according to the city's laws, they could not be thrown out. And this guy said, these people are a fire hazard. They're going to burn the building down. They had 7 people living in a small 3-room apartment. They had newspapers and other flammable things strewn all over the place. And they were the ones who had run the electrical line out into the hallway and had intersected the electrical cable before it reached the meter, and were saving themselves to $22 or less per month. And guess what happened the next week? The whole building went up in flames. And there was an article in it in the Village Voice. And this was one of the first articles that told me to distrust the press. I had trusted the Village Voice to tell me the truth ever since I had been a kid in Buffalo, New York, admiring the Bohemians, admiring the Beatniks, because this was the paper of the Beatniks, the Village Voice. And there was an article on this fire in the Village Voice, and it said that the fire was caused by a slumlord who was extracting exorbitant vampirical profits from this building and not putting a cent in. And it reported, the only thing it reported accurately was the address of the building and the fact that all 7 people in this family that was trying to save on its electrical bills had been killed in the fire. Nothing, everything else was made up. Everything else was made up to fit a social stereotype. Aren't all landlords vampires? Aren't all landlords slumlords? I mean, this landlord was putting a huge investment in that he couldn't possibly get back at $45 a month rents. He was doing it out of the goodness of his heart, because this is his savings he was putting into this. And he's a slumlord? Fuck you. The slumlords were the Village Voice. The slumlords were the Village Voice, and they were slumlords for trashing up our landscape of truth with garbage. Yeah. And getting us to believe it because it fit conveniently into a stereotype. Well, there's a convenient stereotype of Obama on the right. He is a monster.
Okay, well, go ahead.
It's just that he's a monster. So anything that's said about him that's monstrous is accumulated and kept and cherished.
I actually have a similar story to that, now that I think about it. My big thing is, I guess, that I'll just believe anything awful about, like, anything you say against... I mean, it's terrible for me to say this, but anything pretty much that's said about, like, America or the decline of America, I will pretty much believe on just, like, face value. Like, yeah, fucking everything's going to shit.
All right, now, I spent... Well, go ahead. I'm interrupting.
Anyway, so there was a video that I saw perhaps a week or 2 ago. Where this guy, he's a graphic designer. He was talking about he's on a road trip or something, and he's at this motel, and it's got this great old, 1930s, 1940s, 1950s like vintage sign, this big metal sign with this, that retro lettering that wasn't retro at the time, and all this. And the sign is old; it has to be replaced. It's rusted or whatever. And he says to the person, you know, at the running the hotel, can I see the new design? Can you show me, you know, what the new design is? And they show him in like some booklet that the design company had given them, and it's this really chintzy, horrible, just, you know, minimal effort put into it, just ugly sign that, you know, it looks hideous. And then this guy goes off on a tangent about how, you know, these design companies just rip people off, and, you know, it's horrible to charge $5,000 for such shoddy work, and so on and so forth. And that, like, this is why America is, like, getting so ugly, and blah, blah, blah. So I favorite the video because I'm like, yeah, fucking America does look like shit now. Anyway, so I guess somehow someone from the sign company that actually designed that sign, you know, writes me, and they're like, oh, you know, well, you know, there's a lot of stuff that this story isn't really taking into account. First of all, you know, it was explained to this person that was not a good design for their sign. This is something that person, you know, specifically requested for their sign. It's not like we wanted to do that. And the $5,000 is not just for the design; it's for the, you know, the metal, and, you know, we got to put the metal work together. We got to do all this other stuff. And, you know, that's not even the design they ended up using. And, you know, so there's all these factors, and, you know, they just have this whole story where, you know, it becomes obvious to me that the original video that I favorited was actually, you know, not so great after all, and it only told a small portion of the story, and very much of what it actually did tell me was not that accurate. You know, and I kind of felt like duped at that moment, but then I realized, like, well, there's no way I could have known. I mean, I just took it at face value, and, you know, what research could I truly have done based on that video anyway? And it wasn't even, but the thing I guess that bothered me is it wasn't even an assumption that I questioned for a second. I didn't even think for 1 second, like, maybe that's not true. Maybe, you know, maybe there's another side to this story.
Well, the difficulty is when that kind of thing happens in the New York Times or the Washington Post or other major papers. And journalists, in my experience, I love many of the journalists that I've spent time with, and they've been very kind to me. But the fact is, they're very lazy intellectually, and they go according to stereotype. And if they get a half of a fact that fits a stereotype, they won't go out and find the other 100 facts that are part of the story. It's very rarely that they never leave the herd. They say exactly what the herd says about any given issue. They replicate each other's stories, and that's not acceptable, because the first 2 rules of journalism, as I understand it, are the first 2 rules of science. And those rules are, you know these: the truth at any price, including the price of your life, and look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen it before, and then proceed from there. Look at things that you and everybody around you take for granted. This is still rule number 2. What am I doing with 3 fingers up? As if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. And the press, when it violates the rule of courage, and when it looks at things right under their nose just the way everybody else sees them, and not with eyes that are new and fresh, that look for a new point of view, a new angle, a new scoop, a new whatever, it's failing you and me, and it's failing its obligations to even live a meaningful life. What's meaningful about a life in which you just parrot things that you hear from other people without ever checking them up and without ever questioning yourself? Sorry, that doesn't cut it. And I expect a higher degree of integrity from journalists. But on the subject of American civilization dying, there's a sudden something happening around here. You know that I dedicated 7 years of my life to The Genius of the Beast because I felt that I wanted to save Western civilization. And in the process, and it was a book that was out in the desert. No publisher wanted it. No agent wanted it. Nobody wanted it. They didn't get the point.
Which is a shame, because it actually is a, well, I don't want to say actually, like I don't expect it to be, but it was a good book. So
yeah, and hopefully it still is, and hopefully it'll be around for a long time to come.
It is just maybe an unfortunate choice of tense there, but you know, it's
right. But at any rate, the point is that I was all out on a limb doing this, trying to save Western civilization. And in the process of putting the book together, I discovered that little things happened, like in 1850. If you and I had been born in 1850, our average life expectancy would have been 38.5 years, which is fairly short. And if we'd been born in 2000 in a Western civilization, or a country influenced by Western civilization like Japan, our average life expectancy would have been over 70 years. That's an increase of 42 frigging years. That's 2 lifetimes for the price of 1. And another little piece of research led to the fact that if you or I had been among the poorest paid workers in London, in 1850, we'd have been Irish dock workers, and we'd have been earning $4,200 a year. Now think of that, $4,200 a year to have a wife and 7 kids. But if you'd been the poorest paid worker in London in 2000, you would have earned $38,500 a year. You would have been a personal assistant. And that means that as a personal assistant, the poorest paid worker in London in 2000, you'd have made as much money as an entire tenement full of dock workers. That's 7 workers and their 5 children and their wives. 6 times 7 is something I can't even keep track of, 42 or 49 or something like that, people. What Western civilization has delivered is beyond amazing. It's beyond the dreams of the wildest dreams of a Chinese emperor. A Chinese emperor had all the wealth in the world. What did he pour that wealth into? People who would extend his lifetime by 4 years. And we extended lifetimes by 40 years, and the cranks and utter flacks, the utter phonies that the Chinese emperors hired, weren't able to extend their lives by even 6 months, and in some cases they cut those lives short because they were feeding the emperor's poisons. This is utterly phenomenal. It's a miracle, 2 lifetimes for the price of 1. And it isn't just that we make 7 times as much money. It's not the money that really does it. It's new inventions like this that do it. This gives us powers that a Chinese emperor couldn't even dream of. If you and I had walked into the Chinese emperor's palace in 1350 AD, and just 650 years ago, and it says to the Chinese emperor, someday you will have the ability to talk to people on continents you've never heard of before, and you will have the ability to talk to people in cultures that you've never heard of before, and you will have the ability to talk to people all over the face of this globe, and you will be able to do it at an instant's notice, plus your telephone will do an awful lot of thinking for you, and will figure out on its own how to contact these people if you just punch a button. The Chinese emperor would have had you thrown in the dungeon for insanity. It obviously could not happen. Obviously, you're the phony, not the guy who's selling him the arsenic tablets that are supposed to keep him alive for an extra 4 years. So what Western civilization has done is utterly, utterly, utterly beyond belief, and no other civilization, not Islamic civilization, not Chinese civilization, not African civilization, not any civilization, has ever delivered anything that even approaches it. Every civilization in the history of the world has claimed that it will lift the poor and the oppressed. Well, guess what? The poorest people in the West have television sets today. That's beyond the dreams of a Chinese emperor in 1350 AD. Utterly beyond the dreams of a Chinese emperor in 1350 AD. And we consider people well beneath the poverty level if they don't have a television set. And the people who are sleeping out on sidewalks, my heart bleeds for them. I see them sleeping on sidewalks when it's 15 degrees out. I wonder how they stay alive, or 5 degrees out. But the fact is, the quality of clothes that they are wearing outdoes anything a Chinese emperor had, at least when it comes to insulation value. The Chinese emperor may have had more brocades and more fancy decorations and headdresses that stood up to the ceiling and all kinds of stuff like that. But these guys have got clothes that keep them warmer longer, that keep pests and infestations of, what are those animals called that eat your blood and your skin and stuff like that? Parasites! That kept parasites away, and that's these guys sleeping on streets have this privilege. And they have ergonomically designed shoes that make walking easier. Now, I'm not saying they have an easy life. They have a horrible, horrible, horrible life. And that's got to be improved someday. But the fact is, Western civilization has pulled off goddamn fucking material miracles. Utter secular miracles. Acts of secular salvation. And it's been utterly beyond belief. But here I was, all out on a limb, all by myself, trying to say this for 7 years. Well, guess what's happened? There's an unacknowledged movement of this kind. Matt Ridley has come out with an absolutely flamboyantly, extraordinarily, marvelously brilliant book called The Rational Optimist, in which he shows you the very kinds of figures that I'm showing you now, but over and over and over again, and shows you how peak oil. We were told that we were about to hit peak oil in 1912. Have you noticed that we ran out of oil in 1912? We were told we were about to run out of oil in 1932. Did you notice we ran out of oil in 1932 and we switched to an alternate power source since then? And every time there's a prediction of peak oil, we discover more oil. Oil doesn't turn out to be in as short supply as we think. And he busts all kinds of Mishigasa and myths. Mishigasa is a Yiddish word for insanity! So in case you got it wrong. And there's Matt's book, there's Steven Pinker's book, the Better Angels of Our Nature, which shows you that we are told that the last 100 years, the 100 years in which Western culture and American culture in particular have been dominant, have been the bloodiest years in the history of humanity. And Steven Pinker shows you it's the very opposite. That the old days, the days of tribal living, were the bloodiest days in the history of humanity. The greatest percent of humans died by violence perpetrated by other human beings in those days. And that ever since the 1650s, every 50 years, the violence rate has been going down, 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 and even the plunges since 1992 have been going down, 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 despite the hysterical nightmares that parents were having in 1992 over Grand Theft Auto, which they were sure was going to turn their children into axe murderers and serial killers. In the days since Grand Theft Auto came out, the violence rate in the West has declined dramatically. No other civilization has pulled this off. And then the other book is Niall Ferguson's Civilization, The West and the Rest. Now, I haven't read The West and the Rest yet, so I can't tell you what it's all about, but it's another book that tells you, hey, throw Western civilization down the toilet, and you destroy the greatest hope that humanity has ever had. You destroy human longevity, you destroy human health, you put everybody in poverty, and what's more, you kill them all off violently. So if that's what you want to do, and there are deep ecologists who want to do that, who say there's only room for 100 million people on this planet, which means killing 6 billion of us off, so if that's what you want to do, by all means, go back to the Stone Age, go back to the Pleistocene, go back to the medieval period in the 1300s. But if you seriously want to decrease violence and increase the powers of human beings and empower all humans, even the poorest among us, take Western civilization to the next level and the level beyond that, baby, because only Western civilization has ever done it, and only Western civilization is likely to do it in the future, because even the Chinese, who are inventive as hell, and invented science long before we did, and invented encyclopedias of science long before we did, even they operate under an autocratic system in which the kind of freedom of speech that allows a T.J. Kincaid and a Howard Bloom, an amazing atheist, and another amazing, or whatever I am, and a ridiculous atheist, an absurd atheist, a nonsensical atheist, that allows us to have discussions like this and you to watch it on YouTube. Sorry, bunnies, that's out of the picture if China manages to influence and be imitated by every civilization on the face of the planet.